Hello all, Sam Dickinson from the Model Train People. You probably noticed there's a little bit of a different background for me right here. I'm testing out a new green screen, so you won't see this in the podcast episode because I just installed this just before recording this specific intro. For those of you who have been following the podcast, today's episode is going to be a little bit longer than usual, just because me and Dennis felt that today's topic was something that we really wanted to focus on and make sure we were covering all the basic and important points and not splitting it up into multiple things, especially with our episodes being about 2 weeks apart. For those of you who are just now joining us because of today's topic, first and foremost, let me welcome you to the hobby of model railroading. We're always happy to have new people come on because all of us here at the Model Train People strongly believe that the hobby is not dying, it is evolving. There are people that want to get interested in the hobby. You just have to find the right people to help you along your journey. And we hope that today's episode provides that for you. I'm hoping that what we talk about in today's episode is able to provide you with the motivations and maybe a couple of additional pointers or stepping stones as to where to start off in the hobby. And if there are questions that you have after this that you don't see us answering, please put them down in the comments in our YouTube channels. Anyway, I will stop rambling now and I will let us get straight into the episode, and I'll let mine and Dennis's discussion be the deciding factor for you. So once again, thank you all, and I hope you enjoy.
Boop.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Model Train People podcast. Jumping straight into things, because today it's just me and Dennis. So,
Yep.
yeah. So, how's your day? I know you were busy with going to a couple of clubs and whatnot.
Oh, I've been busy. Last weekend I went up to Rochester, New York, the Rochester area, I guess. And spent some time with a member of the community, Paul Stamp.
Ooh,
Nice. Yeah, he let me stay with him and his wife, which was really, I'm super thankful to him for.
Nice.
We spent last Friday, we went out and we chased Alcos on the Falls Road. We caught an RS-32, all the whole run
come
from.
on. Now you're making me feel bad.
Unfortunately, it was long hood forward, just the way that it was set up out of the yard. So it wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful.
Right.
We caught that all the way from Lockport all the way to Brockport, New York.
Nice.
And then we jumped at Brockport. We jumped off, grabbed some lunch, and then hit the LA&L and caught a C424 and C425 doing some switching, which was especially exciting for me because the 425 that they have, LA&L number 425, is the last remaining New Haven Century around, which was very cool. It was New Haven 2553.
Okay.
Then Friday night and Saturday all day was the Lake Shores division of the NMRA's Ops Around the Clock Ops weekend. So I got to three great layouts there, including Paul's own layout and the Rochester Model Railroad Club. And then the next day I went. Paul managed to arrange for him and myself and a couple other folks to go visit Bruce Ryan's wonderful Manhattan Terminal layout, which is a gorgeous layout, and it's so fun to run. Okay. And then this weekend I finally got home. I visited family out in Ohio after that, and then today I spent all day volunteering at the Danbury Railway Museum,
Nice.
helping out, giving tours of the rail yard there, which was a lot of fun too. So
Nice. Yeah.
keep busy.
Yeah, I kind of get a little jealous of you because of where all the stuff you're able to do in your area, and I'm stuck, it feels like, in the one corner where it's too far for me to go for anything, and there's nothing right here. And no offense to anyone listening, but my club is not exactly the most interesting for me at times. It can definitely get frustrating because I see the way the club does certain things, and it's like, why not do it this way? This would be better. Why not go to this? Like, there's going to be a show.
You have,
like, no, go ahead.
You have like an idea of things that could be happening that aren't, and it's a little frustrating. I get that.
Exactly. And unfortunately, they don't have a permanent layout. It's just we set it up and that's it. At our shows, because they won't go to any show that people have to pay to get into. Which, it's like, well, how are people supposed to, like, is a one show that we can go to that's right here, there's no layout whatsoever, but the guy wants us to bring our layouts, but we won't because, we haven't...
Because of your rule.
Yeah, because the unwritten rule that's not in the bylaws.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, but, yeah.
People will be people.
Yeah, that's true, and I hope that this doesn't kind of throw anyone off from today's topic. Which, if you saw, Which, if you saw by the title of this episode, this topic kind of got spurred on by a couple of interactions that we've had recently, and that is starting from step 0, which seems, I'm sure for a lot of people that are listening to this podcast, that probably seems like a weird concept. Like, what do you mean by starting at step 0? I'm saying someone who's never had an introduction to the hobby, they've never been involved in model railroading, they've never bought a model train, they've never gone rail fanning or anything. They're just a normie, shall we say, that has other interests and hobbies, but they happen to see a model railroad somewhere in some way, shape, or form, or hear about something going on, and they're like, hey, that's kind of cool. How do I get involved in this? That sounds like something interesting. So, I had a couple interactions, one of which happened at my local car part store, where I happened to get in a discussion with the cashier, and he mentioned that, hey, I've been interested in wanting to get to model railroading, but I don't know where to start. And I'm like, you know what? That's a good idea for the podcast. And then we had a gentleman join our Discord server simply because they said they specifically said they've wanted to go through several, like, they go through several hobbies, and this hobby they picked in particular was model railroads, and they're like, how do you get started in model railroads? And the journey of talking to this person and giving them advice over the past couple weeks has been very interesting, to say the least, because it's gotten a lot of us in the community to just stop and think of, hey, this is someone that literally doesn't know Union Pacific from Conrail. They don't know N scale from HO. They don't know a 2% grade from a 4% grade. They don't know Kato track from Atlas track or anything else in between. They just know, they know what a train is, they know what a model train is, and that's it.
and they want in.
Yes, they want in. And so, to kind of start this off a little bit, we started a poll on through our community to try and get a little bit of an idea of where our community is sitting with how they all got into model railroading, and it did show a couple of really interesting points that I think we'd need to address in addition to this, just because of how some people want to get into the hobby and where we should give them advice. So
Yeah.
just because of how I have my recording, I can't necessarily pull it up. So that if you want to kind of pull up and lead into a couple of the questions that we asked here to kind of give us a rundown of some of these answers that we got.
Yeah, well, first of all, you talked about, where does someone go where they're on step zero. They know literally nothing. And you talked about how that was a strange experience for a lot of us as a community because we've been around the hobby for a while. And our poll goes to show that.
Yeah, I believe it was over 85% of the people that responded to that poll have been in the hobby for 10 years or longer, and over 60, almost 65% of them have been in the hobby longer than 20 years.
Yes, so exactly.
That really showed that this is like, yeah, we can get some advice from people, because having advice for that long is really, really good. But sometimes when you've been in the hobby for so long, you can forget what it was like to start off at step zero.
Yeah. And especially, the next question that we had asked after how long are you in the hobby is at what age did you join the hobby? And, the data that we have shows that a lot of the folks, at least in our community, joined the hobby when they were, before they were at the age of 10.
Oh, yeah.
So they've been around it their whole life.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's hard for some of us to kind of think back to that point, because for a lot of us, that's beyond what our brains can recollect, really.
Oh, yeah.
So it's something that we figured is important to talk about and try to articulate our best advice, I guess, for anyone out there who is in this situation of, well, I found this train thing and I think it's cool. What do I do?
Right, exactly. So, yeah. But it's I almost feel like I'm losing my train of thought right now, just kind of processing everything as I'm still, because I have looked at these answers. I'm not just processing it as he's telling me. We actually did go through all this stuff and everything. It's just because I'm not seeing it myself because of reasons. I'm recording on my cell phone. I've got OBS Studio up on the computer, but yeah, even for me, it's like I got my first train at 2 years old, and that was a wooden Thomas train. That wasn't necessarily what I'd call a model train, but it was a toy train, and it definitely was what led me into the hobby. My first true experience with model trains was around 8 or 9 years old, and I still remember my first model railroad. Me and my dad put it up it was a really dark and stormy night in Detroit, of all places, which makes it even better. But we had the weather radio on, and my dad just grabbed a piece of junk plywood out of the garage. He pulled down some end scale track and said, "Hey, we're going to make a model railroad." And it was just a simple oval with one of those crescent passing sidings on it. And that was it. But that was my first model railroad, which I did enjoy that. I got some good excitement out of that, but it wasn't something that had really stuck to me until I started doing more and more of it throughout high school. But I was more of ironically, I was more of a collector than I was an actual modeler at that point. I got in between that point and when I graduated high school, I'd only built one other layout, and that was at like my senior year that I decided, you know what, I'm going to build a model railroad for the arts and crafts part of my school's talent show. It was a little piece of plywood with an oval and two sidings, grass mat, nails, and cotton balls for trees. But for if you look back at like all the stuff that I got a whole bunch of stuff from my grandpa, and I picked up a couple other things at various places, and I was more of a collector than anything else. Didn't really focus on anything in particular that I wanted to model at that point. I just like I collected some model trains and put them on a loop of track, and that was it. I called it good. But once
Yeah, and
yeah.
keep
But
going.
okay.
Don't mean to interrupt.
But once I graduated high school and started getting more involved in the local historical society, which led me to get introduced to the N-Track Club, that's where I really started to take off with the modeling side and actually operating trains and learning more about DCC and all that other fun stuff. But like if I look back on it, it's like I was introduced to the hobby not by choice, shall we say. I already had that introduction, and that too. I'm curious because I don't think I ever heard this story. How did you get into model trains?
Well, it's kind of always been there.
So just like kinda me.
Yeah, my parents like to joke that the hospital room that I was born in, I had a window overlooking the Hudson River Valley, and you had Metro North on the one side, and you had the CSX on the other side, and that was that. And then I was in the train. I started out with Thomas the Tank Engine wooden trains and
Just like
Fisher Price
Oh
Geotrax
yes,
trains.
the Fisher Price and the Geotrack. How could I forget those? I had those too.
And then
the Lionel Adventures where they made
the
their
Great
own
Railway Adventures books. Yep,
those ones I had those too.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy, how could I have forgotten those ones? Like those were classics, and people don't even remember. I remember we had one of the Great Model Railroad stores in I want to say it was Novi, Michigan. At one of the malls there, or in one of the northern city suburbs of Detroit. And they were going out of business, and they had a whole bunch of those Great Railway Adventures trains. And my dad he went there and just bought trash bags full of these tenders on discount sale, put them over on eBay, and made a profit off of them. Like, oh man, that just brought a core memory unlocked.
Well, happy I could do that for you. For folks who are unaware, Great Railway Adventures was a series of books put out in part by Lionel. It was a series of railway stories, and they had Thomas the Tank Engine style wooden train scale stuff that went along with them. And it was a great, they usually, the ones that I had, they also came with a tape that was narrated by LeVar Burton that told you the story, and it was it was a wonderful way to introduce younger folks into model railroading and trains and stuff, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, I think LeVar was probably one of the best choices for that. I mean, he did Reading Rainbow and Star Trek, so it was a household name. I mean, unlike George Carlin, but George Carlin's still a classic, and so is Ringo Starr, but I digress. But yeah, so it kind of, it sounds like you pretty much had the same story as me.
Yeah, I had the prototypical, so to speak, model railroader upbringing.
Right. So,
but we're not here to talk about the prototypical model railroader upbringing. We're here to talk about the folks who didn't necessarily have that. So,
right. But even with our, I think this leads into question 3. How did you get introduced to the hobby? Most other people had that.
Yes.
Like there was even one answer that specifically said, my dad worked for a railroad for 37 years. And it's like, wow, that's, I mean, that's how it happens sometimes. Like, you've got a lot of people that say, I got it. I got my first train for Christmas. I got first train for birthday. Um, I was introduced by a family member.
Or I think my favorite. There were trains in my house before I was born.
Yep, exactly. So it's like for a lot of people, like you already have an introductory to it, but it's like I said, it's like you just have someone where they're just like they're walking through a mall and somebody happens to have a train set up there, and they're like, "Wow, that's kind of cool," or they see it at a Santa village or something.
Yeah. So to kind of direct the podcast towards the person who's listening in, trying to be like,
Yes.
so what the heck do I do? Just be aware
Yes,
that
yes.
you may get a little frustrated because you're not understanding what people are saying, and that's because so many of these people have, so many of us Mongol railroaders, this group that you're trying to get into, we've been around it our whole lives. So there's a lot of assumptions that we have as far as a basic understanding of knowledge.
Yes.
So, be a little bit patient with us. We're a little bit strange, but we'll get there eventually.
I promise we don't bite.
Too much. No.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess like I believe what was I want to make sure I'm staying kind of on track here. What was question number 4 after that one?
So question 4 is actually leads well into what I wanted to talk about next, which is what scale did you start with? So
Yes,
before we
scales.
get to that question, I want to talk a little bit about what the different model railroad scales are for folks who are unfamiliar.
Oh yeah.
So there's usually like 4 standard model railroad scales that most people will fall into. You have O scale or O gauge, which is a Lionel train. So you've seen it in all the movies. It's what is around the Christmas tree in all the Christmas movies, or it's, in the mall displays at, in all these classic movies and TV shows and stuff. Or if you've seen like Young Sheldon, that's what Sheldon has in that show. That's a Lionel O gauge train. So its scale is about 1 to 48. And there's a couple different breakdowns within there. There's true scale, and then there's semi-scale, and then there's O27, which that specifically refers to 27-inch radius of the curves, which means that's a very sharp curve.
It's actually diameter.
Okay, so even even sharper.
Tighter.
So that basically that means it's a very sharp curve. So the trains won't really go around the curve the way a real train would. They're kind of much more articulated, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it allows you to run trains in a much smaller space at that scale.
Like I've been able to fit an O27 oval on a hollow core door for reference. Just it's like a 30 by 80 inch space, which is usually what's considered for N scale, but I can fit a Lionel O scale track on a hollow core door table without issue. So
that's kind of a lot of people start with that. A lot of people, because it's big, it's fairly robust. A lot of people, when they're bringing their younger kids into the hobby, they'll have a Lionel train set or a Menards O gauge train set or something of that,
or K-line.
MTH or Atlas O or whatever, because it's a little more robust. It's bigger. The parts aren't really as easy to come off and for kids to eat. So it's
unless you're getting one of the super detailed ones, which are thousands of dollars.
Yes. So that's. Talk a little bit about pros and cons. O gauge, big, you can see lots of detail.
It was a lot cheaper back in the day.
Yeah, it nowadays it tends to run pretty expensive. So it's if you have some money to spare, or if you just want to get kind of the entry level stuff and you don't really care too much about a lot of the detail, you can still find things for decent prices. But it tends, because it's so large, it tends to run higher end price.
Right.
So that's kind of O gauge. The next step down from that is S gauge, which typically is American Flyer. That's the biggest manufacturer of S gauge around, basically.
Which they are now owned by Lionel as well.
Yes.
ironically. Considering that back in the 40s and 50s and everything, they were the two competitors. You were either Lionel or American Flyer, and you had that choice. And of course, there was Marks, but we don't talk about them.
So S gauge is at a scale of 1 to 64. And when I say this 1 to whatever, think of it as 1 inch equals, in this case, 64 inches. So 1
Yep.
inch on your model train is 64 inches on the real train in S gauge.
Yep.
And S gauge is a bit of a tough gauge to get into.
Oh yeah, especially if you're doing it scale.
You have some good stuff as like starter entry level, but once you want to get more detailed, there's not a lot available. You have to scratch build or kit bash, which is scratch building is what it says, building it from scratch.
Like
Kit
imagine
bashing
like
is when you
well, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, sorry. I actually have a good analogy for this. Think of
Go for
this
it.
one should be easy. Think of a Lego set. Scratch building is building something from just random Lego pieces to make something
No
that's cohesive for
instructions.
you. No instructions whatsoever. Kit bashing is where you buy a set and you use just those pieces to kind of make something else, or you take two different sets and combine them to make one set in particular.
So scratch building, you take your big bin of Legos, you dump it out on the floor, you start putting stuff together.
Yep.
Kit bashing, you take one Lego set, you dump it out, you throw the instructions away, and you put something else together with it. Or you
Yes.
throw a couple Lego sets together and you build something else with it.
Yep.
So that's, when you get into S gauge, your S scale, you tend to run up into that a lot faster than you would with some of the other scales that we're about to get into, just because there's not as much available.
Oh,
But if you are into model cars, 1 to 64 is like one of the most common scales for model cars.
Hot
So
Wheels
you can
and
put your model
Matchbox.
cars in with your model trains. So that's if that's the side of you're coming into the hobby from, that may be a good place for you to start, because you can kind of combine your hobbies.
Oh yeah, but then again, if you're just doing it for fun and you're not necessarily worried about, like, say, I want to model the Chicago Metro line that I ride into Chicago every day on a scale basis or something. You just want to have a couple trains, put them on the track, and run them so that you and your kids can have a little bit of fun or something. That it's not a problem to kind of mix up a few things. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah. And then there was something else I was going to mention. I'm trying to think of what it was, but I forgot. But yeah, it's like, oh, I know. Like, we keep saying, using two terms, scale and gauge.
Yes.
People use those two terms intertwining, thinking, oh, they mean the same thing. No. Scale is that 1 to whatever that we give. That's the scale of how small it is. The gauge is the distance between the two tracks. So, like, I've got a micrometer here. So, like, that is about, it depends. So this is one scale, this is another, and sometimes a couple of
one gauge.
these are the gauges, however
And
wide or
that's
short.
measuring the distance between the inside faces of the rails,
Yes.
to be clear.
Yep, usually. So with that, it's like, just be aware, because there are some scales that they have different gauges, but they're all part of the same scale. So keep that in mind. We try to keep the term scale, but gauge is used intertwiningly, just because most often you're talking about standard gauge, which is 4 foot 8.5 inches. And while sometimes it's not exactly prototypical in certain areas, that's generally, when we use gauge intertwiningly, we're usually referring to standard gauge of a specific scale.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Not to derail too much, but I felt like that needed to be mentioned. So.
Yeah. And so, we talk about O gauge, which O gauge is usually specified as O gauge because you have your semi scale, you have your O27 stuff. That's not necessarily 1 to 48 scale.
Right.
So you have O gauge, you have S scale. Those are not nearly as common, especially nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
In our survey response, we had for reference, we had 17 folks respond to our survey. We had 1, 2, 3, 4 people respond that they were in O gauge, and 1 person respond they're in S gauge.
Yeah.
So relatively low numbers. The next 2 gauges that we're going to get into, which are the other 2 common gauges or scales, excuse me. I'm getting caught up in it now.
Like I said, we use them interchangeably without thinking about it. And this is exactly what I mean. Like, we have to ground ourselves just to talk about this. But I want to make sure we don't forget, because there is one other scale above all of this that we need to talk about. I want to talk about, but I won't. We're going down, so we'll keep going.
We'll circle back to that, because the reason I didn't talk about that is it wasn't in our survey, so I wasn't thinking about it. But that's it. We'll circle back to that.
And the other interesting niche scales that are out there as well, which I mentioned one without even realizing it. So,
so then the next common scale down is HO, which it was originally derived from half O.
Right. But there is another twist thing, because HO has 2 sides to it.
We're going to talk HO and double O?
Yes.
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 I figured, because that was in our responses.
Yes, it was.
So HO is 1 to 87, and that's, for the most part, holds pretty firm. Once we get down to these scales, when we talk about a scale, it is that scale. There's very little deviation from that. So HO scale is almost always, except for like very low end stuff that's not super detailed, it's almost always going to be pretty much exactly 1 to 87 scale.
Yeah.
And that's, for the most part, North American and some Japanese prototypes are at 1 to 87.
German too.
And German stuff too. Yes. Then running roughly the same gauge of track.
It is the same,
but at a slightly different scale is double O. And I admit I don't know too much about double O. So Sam, I don't know if you want to fill in a little bit.
Right. So for I'm sure I know there's a few people that know exactly what double O is, and if we have anyone from Great Britain or Ireland that are listening, they'll know exactly what this is. Double O was supposed to technically be half the size of O, and it ran on the HO gauge track or double O gauge track at the same time. But the reason it was slightly bigger was because they had larger electronics that they had to fit in to make sure that these would work. But it's basically, more commonly, it's a British gauge. There are American models in it, but they're very, 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 very niche. It's a point of you just get HO scale trains if you want to model American. That's how niche it is. But it's generally just British. And that's about it. Like, people have even used double O and HO interchangeably. Jimmy Lambert is a good example of that on YouTube. He does that all the time, interchanging those 2 scales. But double O, the biggest company that's involved in double O is Hornby. That was like the big name in British model railroading. And then I believe you also have Duplo, and then there's a couple others. I can't think of them. There's a couple, but
nowadays Rapido UK is getting into it a bit as well. So
but
you got a few different manufacturers producing at that
Hornby
scale.
is definitely the big one to mention. In fact, I believe they advertise themselves pretty much as the starter company for double O and, in a way, HO. But Yeah, so you've got HO if you're North American, you've got double O if you're over in the UK and other areas, but you can get both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
And then
Basically,
even oh, go ahead.
basically that's the one of the most common gauges scales
Yeah,
to
it is
model.
the most. It is the
Yeah.
most common one, pretty much.
So it is, if you go and you see, like a model train set up at, at a fair or at a mall or somewhere, that's
Yeah.
most likely what you're going to see, in addition to Sam's cat absolutely, flying through the frame.
She has been in a habit of constantly jumping up on my desk whenever I'm here. Surprisingly, she stayed away for this long. But yeah. Anyway.
So
But, yeah.
HO is, like I said, it's pretty much the most common stuff. It's what you're going to see in a lot of places.
Mhm.
It is small enough that you can fit a good size, fairly large amount
Mhm.
of model railroading in not that much space. And typically that's what a lot of people start with. There's a lot of starter sets available in HO scale at a fairly affordable price.
Right.
And you can
It's
set up.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you could set up a good sized layout on a 4x8 sheet of plywood.
Right. It's also, I'd say, it's a really good balance between size and detail. If you're going up more
Yes.
towards like S scale or O scale, you're kind of focusing more on the details. When you're going to HO and smaller, you're kind of more focusing on how much, or on fitting more into a space. But HO's that really good balance between the two.
Yeah, it's,
So.
to kind of, I guess, I don't know. I don't really want to say this unless we're done. Do you have more to say about HO?
No, not really.
Okay.
I'm
It's pretty much just ubiquitous,
yeah. Right. I mean, there's various. I mean, you've got, technically speaking, there are 3 different types of HO. You've got American HO, you've got British double O, and then you have Marklin HO. Yeah, Marklin HO, which is German. There's pretty much, think how the Lionel trains work. It's technically 3 rails. You've got, the power goes out of the outside rails through the engine to the inside rails. Marklin, they specifically have like these little spikes that go down the middle of the track. So it takes out the unrealism of having that third rail go down, but you can make reversing loops without needing all the extra special electronics or at risk of short-circuiting your model railroad.
Yeah, so there's some considerations to be had there, and I want to be careful that we don't go too deep into the weeds. Because
it is.
We're trying to keep this very surface level for you folks out there who are just discovering the hobby and are trying to figure out what everything is here.
Yeah,
but there are some considerations to be had on that for sure.
Yeah, as you can tell, there's a lot. We take pride and passion in this, which is why I keep coming up to this and this and this and this. So. But yeah, so
there's
anyway.
so many things to know and there's so many things to learn. So we're kind of keeping the surface level, but as we'll get into later, there are so many rabbit holes you can go down, and we highly encourage you to do so.
Yes, we do. So, and I'll mention a couple of those rabbit holes as if I'm just walking down the street saying that's the Jones house, that's the Smith house, that's the Brown house. We'll do that after all of this. So anyway, next up.
But to kind of transition, I'm gonna, we talked a little bit about what you get versus bigger scales versus smaller scales, and there's a kind of saying that I've heard tossed around, which I want to relate here because I think it does a fairly good job of kind of separating out the different scales and gauges in terms of what you want to focus on. So the way I've heard it, if you want to model a single piece of rolling stock, you model O or S.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to model a train, you do HO. Yeah. If you want to model a railroad, you do the last very common scale, which is N scale. N scale is 1 to 160. It's about half again as small as HO, slightly less than half, or slightly bigger than half as small,
Yeah,
if that makes any
in
sense.
general, if you're
But
taking the middle ground between double O and HO, N scale is half the size.
yeah, so it's what's really nice about N scale is, and this is totally biased because I am an N scale. I know Sam is largely an N scaler,
Yep.
as well. But what I find really nice about N scale is that it allows you to get a lot in and not a lot of space.
Oh, yeah.
Even more so than HO. You lose out on some of the detail though, which is why that statement kind of increases in scope while losing some of the finer details. As you get smaller, you certainly can. And I just recently finished putting a whole bunch of little tiny details onto an engine in N scale. So you absolutely can do that, but it becomes harder and harder as you go down in scale to get all those fine little details. But
Oh, yeah.
conversely, because you have more train to area ratio, so to speak, you can more easily model larger areas, larger scenes, larger pieces of rolling, larger pieces of landscape.
Yep.
Large, things like that you lose out on some of the size from in the larger scales. So
Right.
there's this, these two lines that kind of go back and forth from each other in terms of detail and in terms of amount of space you have to build a scene.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the push and pull of N scale to O gauge.
Right. And unfortunately, there are not. N scale tends to be, if for another reference, it also happens to be the space saver. I mean, for you,
Yes.
you're living in an apartment. You have it on 1 foot by 6 foot.
I do.
I'm limited to my bedroom, which is like a 12 by 12 space with a bed and a dresser and a desk and other things, and the need for at some point in the future of my life other people to be in that room. So I need to keep it small. I mean, like I said, you can fit a really, really decent sized N scale layout in a 30-inch by 80-inch space, which is the size of which is basically it's a hollow core door or a closet sized door laid down on its side. You can fit a really decent layout in that space and be perfectly fine with it. But also like it's definitely for the people that have smaller space, and it's kind of a little cheaper than HO as well, simply because it is smaller, so it uses less material. But that is also subject to change because N scale is an interesting price and where everything's made and everything. And also, it's not as common amongst the older people simply because of its size. Like, I like it's the age-old saying of every year the trains get smaller.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's definitely a good scale, and for sure. I've been modeling N scale since I was 8. So,
yeah.
So
those are the four kind of four-ish major scales that folks tend to model.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, and there are other scales from that which we can touch on just a little bit here. But those are the four most common that you'll run up against when you're getting into the hobby. And depending on how much space you have, how much money you have, and how much detail you're looking for, you can kind of judge based on how we discussed them where on that line you want to fall.
Yeah. Now, there are 3 other what I would consider small scales that fall below HO. And I'll go from largest to smallest. You have TT, which was originally the smallest scale, and that is a scale of 1 to 120. So it's halfway between N scale and HO. And that one's it was kind of common back in the 60s and 70s. Like, it was even known around back in the 60s or 50s, but not as common. And it's only started to have a small resurgence within the past decade. Then you have Z scale, which is 1 to 220. So I want to say about technically speaking, think half as small as N scale. Z scale's been the very, very common smallest scale, and it has its popularity. And it's definitely one that you are not modeling operations. It's almost exclusively you're operating it to just run trains. Like
you're putting up a loop and you're watching the train go around, which is a lot of fun to do, and you can do it in such a tiny space with Z scale.
Oh yeah, you can fit it in a suitcase.
It's really neat.
Yeah, I've seen suitcase model railroads with that. I even saw a music box Z scale train.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes. So, and then there is one scale smaller than that, and that's T scale, which they're still unsure about exactly what scale it is, but it's generally referred to be between 1 in 400 to 1 in 450. Like, literally, it's like fit on your finger small. Like,
yes, it is puny.
But it's very, very cool. Like, I've considered getting a set. Like, I've actually started going through and doing the pricing on it. I have an idea on something I could do with it just to really show it off, but it'll take some time and saving. But those are the 3 other small scales down there. But
and actually, I do want to. Well, I guess we want if we want to jump up to bigger than HO, there are 2 other scales that I do want to talk about as
Technically 3. There's
one of
other,
which.
Yeah. Technically 3, but yes, go ahead. And even more, but go ahead. So
one of which I wanted to, I thought of earlier when we were discussing our Lego analogy.
Oh, okay.
Which is L gauge.
Yes, you're already on my same page. Okay, never mind.
Yep.
So yes,
L gauge is exactly what it sounds like. Like, it is trains made out of Legos, and it runs on Lego tracks. And if you go to model train shows, you might see a layout like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really cool side of the hobby if you're already really into Legos.
Yep. And
because it's all about Legos. It's really cool.
And what brought that on was Lego actually started their own track scale, like their own sectional track that ran just like your normal model trains, ran off of the power. They've since, out of money saving, they switched to the battery power and remote control running on just plastic track. But yeah, Lego scale or L scale is such an awesome thing. It's so cool to see it. And yeah, that would probably be another good scale for people to start off with. If you're very familiar with Legos, try to go to a toy store or something, see if they have some Lego trains, and start off with that and try and figure out how to make your own, and then try and find the groups that do it and learn how to make the more realistic ones out of Lego. So
there's groups online, there's Reddit pages, there's forum pages, there's places to find groups online if you really want to get looped in with the L scale people.
Oh yeah, it's a highly recommended scale. And then going all the way big, we have the combo of 2, which is G scale and F scale. So G scale, F scale, I'll explain.
So it's really what it kind of is it's realistically it's G gauge and F scale.
Yep, pretty much.
Going back to that scale gauge conversation that we had earlier.
Yes, that F scale came about because of G gauge, but G it stands for garden because it's big enough and robust enough that it can live in your garden. There are plenty of people that have built railroads in their gardens out of it, but there are people that have built layouts out of G gauge inside. There was a really, really big one up in the Dayton, Cincinnati area up until just last year called Entertainment Junction, and it was the largest G scale model railroad indoors, and that since they had to shut down the beginning of the year, but very coolly is the people over at Fire Crown Media who bought Model Railroader magazine and Trains magazine from Kalmbosch, they bought the layout and all the equipment and everything, and I guess they're trying to move it down to Chattanooga or something.
Yep. Yep.
So that was very cool to see. But G Gauge, that's another thing of you want to model a stage. Either that or you just want to have a train run in your garden. And then F is basically just, it's where people decide, it's kind of like how HO came about because of Double O. HO is more scale to the rails, whereas Double O is a little bit bigger than the rails. G Gauge was the same way. And somebody said, hey, I want to have something that's more accurate to modeling the standard gauge, so they came up with F, which I believe stands for 15 millimeters or something like that. I can't remember.
45 millimeter.
45
for narrow gauge for FN3.
Yeah.
But it's a scale of 1. It's a scale of 1 to 20.3.
Yep. And then going up from there, you have your rideable trains, the live steam groups that run through parks, or the trains that run through KOA campgrounds or zoos or things like that. Just they're miniature rideable trains, and that's it. It pretty much anything where the gauge of the rail is 2 foot or greater is a real train. At that point, you're modeling 1-to-1. So yeah. So but yeah, there's a huge range of stuff, and I'm sure that there's probably a few other scales that have been invented that we probably don't even know about, just because somebody did it themselves, and it's like, okay. But yeah, so that's you. At that point, it's really just a decision of how detailed do you want to go, or how expensive do you want to go, or how much do you want to fit in a space, or how much space do you have? That's really where it comes down to picking a size. So, yeah.
So that's kind of our rundown on scales. Yes. And I think the follow-up question that we had to that, which is important to talk about, is the follow-up question we asked, because the question we asked is, what scale did you start with? And, about roughly half started with HO, roughly half started with N, and then the rest fell into O or S.
Yep.
Or a couple double O. Then we had our, do you still model that? 35% of people, no. I moved away from that scale that I started with, and now I model a different scale.
Yeah.
47%, so almost half, yes, and others.
Yeah.
So, when you pick a scale to start, you're not beholden to that.
Oh, yeah.
You can move away. You can decide, well, actually, this is either too big or too small or whatever for me. I want to try something else.
Oh, yeah.
And you can either keep that original stuff for sentimental values, or to model something else in another way of modeling, or you can sell it on to someone else and have it be part of someone else's journey. There's a lot of resale of model trains in the community, and it helps these trains that have been put together and manufactured really well continue on from person to person to person, spreading joy and entertainment for various people.
Oh yeah, it's like, for me, it's like, right now I actually have 4 scales in my house. I've got my N scale, which is my collection. I have some HO, and the HO is a combination of, I can use this stuff to go operate on my buddy's layout, or it's so that I can get a collection of things that I can't get in N scale, and I don't want to model in N scale to have it. It's just, it's a few pieces I've had, and then I have a collection of Lionel, because I do have a soft spot for the post-war Lionel stuff. And that one, it started off by me just walking into an antique shop on my birthday, and I saw a Lionel train there, one of the Lionel Berkshires, and it was within my price range. I'm like, you know what? I'm buying this for myself as a birthday gift. And then somebody from church gifted me a whole bunch of Lionel trains, and it just went from there. And I have a collection. And then I was gifted an American Flyer set in S scale. So I have 4 scales in my house, but I really only model 1. I just have the others
Yeah.
for other reasons. I focus on one, but I have interest in others.
And another common story is people who have, like, there was a guy back in earlier this year. I went down to Long Island for a model railroad weekend, focused on operations, where you go and you run people's model railroads like the real thing. And this guy had a really beautiful HO scale layout in his basement, and then in his backyard he had a big G gauge layout. So this garden layout plus a layout in the basement is a very common thing as well.
Right. Well, I think Billy from the Rail Brothers, he had that too. He had his layout around there, and then he has a garden train out in the backyard.
He does. And he's starting building a T-Track module or two. So sorts of stuff.
Yeah, which if you're interested in hearing more on that discussion, go back. I believe this would be episode 6, so go back to episode 4 of this season. I believe. So
something
it was,
like that.
it was the display layouts episode and the 2-parter that we did with the Rail Brothers and Stack Talk. But yeah, go back and listen to that episode. But yeah.
So we've been throwing this word layout around.
Yes.
What is a layout, Sam?
Well, the layout is where you operate the trains, and obviously, just laying the track together and putting it around the floor, or on the floor, or around the Christmas tree, that doesn't count as a layout. That's just playing with trains.
Yeah.
Building
the way we.
Yeah.
I was going to say kind of the same thing you were, I think, about to say, which is when we talk about a layout, typically what we mean in the model railroad community is a set of tracks, whether they're individual little sections or bigger flexible pieces that have been permanently or at least semi-permanently affixed to a board or a piece of foam or something that's a semi-permanent setup that is going to stay in that configuration for a while.
Yes.
And it's where you run your trains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in that case, like, we all talk about having our layout, and this is where a lot of people get stuck. They keep bringing up in this hobby, they keep bringing the argument of, oh, I don't have enough space to do that, or they have dreams of grandeur where they want to build a layout the size of a pole barn, but they only have the size of a small bedroom to work with, and they can't get around the idea of they can do something in that. But when we're talking about the layout, it's it's probably what you saw that got you into model railroading in the first place, or made you at least want to find out more about it. It's got the track laid on it, it's got all the sceneries, it's got all the buildings, it's got everything. So in that area, it's like, that's what the layout is. Or the tabletop, or whatever terminology, or module, whatever terminology you want to use for it, that's what it is. Or the best way, I believe it was John Armstrong used this one, is it's the stage for the model trains. The layout is the stage, and the model trains are the actors.
Absolutely.
So that's the best way to describe it. So
I 100% agree. It's where you do your modeling, so to speak. It's where your modeling goes on display. Whether it's your buildings that you're building, your trains that you're buying and putting together and running around, your trees that you're making, whatever you want, that's where it goes on display, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, and one of the first big steps you make in the hobby is building a layout. And for a lot of people, that starts with a 4x8 sheet of plywood. And really, that's all you need to start with a good starter layout. You need a 4x8 sheet of plywood, maybe some foam if you want to, build a little bit of ground differences in landscaping. But you need your 4x8 sheet of plywood, and you need some track and a train. Yeah. And that's good enough for your starter layout.
Yeah. Well, with N scale, you
And
can go
you'll
small.
go through a bunch of layouts. Your starter layout doesn't
yeah.
have to be your
Oh
final
yeah.
layout.
Yeah,
So,
and
what
that's
were you saying, Fab?
I was gonna say for N scale, you can go even smaller. You can start off with a 2 foot by 4 foot sheet of plywood, and like
Yes.
that, or like I mentioned, the hollow core door. You can use that one as
Yes.
well for it, and it's one thing you have to be careful though with that is just the overreach. It's like you want to be able to access the layout in in the space that you have. Like it 4 foot depth is really pushing the limits if it's especially if it's say tucked in a corner or something of a room.
Hmm.
So we're not discouraging it just because there's so many things. You look out on building your first model railroad and they show an HO scale or a Lionel layout on a 4x8 sheet of plywood. That's been around since day one pretty much of the hobby. That's what the display layouts were built on because Lionel and American Flyer wanted to display their trains and show them in operation because showing the trains in operation got people to say, hey, I want to buy this. That's why you go into so
Hmm.
many hobby shops and you see a model railroad set up on display because seeing it in operation gets those wheels turning, so to speak, to get you to want to say, hey, I want to model that. I want to do something like that. I want to build something like that. And so
So yeah,
that's where it starts, really.
and
But
we're jumping slightly ahead here to what our next topic was going to be, which is some questions that members of the community asked that or
mhm,
put out that would be in their mind would have been great to have answers to when they were first
mhm,
starting out. But one
yes.
of those questions is how much space do you really need for even a basic 4x8 layout? And
Yes.
I would say you need as much space as you can get in order to reach all the way, reach every part of the layout.
Yep.
That's, I think, the most important part of having a layout is that you can reach everywhere
Right.
on it. So if you have a 4x8 sheet of plywood and you
Mhm.
stick it in the corner, that backmost corner is going to be very hard to reach. So
Yes.
it's something to consider. Are your arms long enough to reach that? Or do you have a step stool
Mhm.
that allows you to reach that and then maybe that's okay? Or do you need to think about some other way to put it in the room?
Mhm.
That way you can reach all parts of the layout.
Yeah. Like
And
there's
that would be my answer to the question is how much space do you need? As much space as you can get in order to reach everywhere on it.
right. And that's brought about some very creative things. Like I've seen people build bar tables and or like bar desk tables and coffee
Hmm.
tables and dining room tables where they were hollow on the inside, had a glass top, and they built the model railroad inside of those spaces. Kind of created like a
Yeah.
discussion topic type thing. And those are very, very cool in of themselves, but they require a little more of woodworking in that area. And we're not necessarily saying start with one of those. We're just showing those
Well,
off as
unless you have a
examples.
woodworking shop,
Yeah,
and
and you
then yeah,
love
go
doing
ahead
yeah,
start
and
with
you
one.
love doing that. Yeah. Like if you have been a woodworker, because and that's another thing. If I don't mind jumping to this real quick, is
Yeah,
model railroading is a hobby in a hobby.
a hundred
You've got
percent.
woodworking, you've got electrical wiring, you've got painting, you've got so many little bits and pieces. Like you've got
So many
model
specialties.
building in general, just so many different little pieces into it that it's literally an all around hobby. In fact, most people probably already have at least one of those skills needed to make a model railroad, sometimes even two already. Like if you know
Yes.
how to build a table or something out of wood by using 1x4s and screws, you could already build the table for your model railroad. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely gets into one of the answers that we already got for the next question. But yeah, it's like so many people have asked, like somebody wanted to know, like how can you safely run larger O scale trains on the O27? Because Lionel had some really, really big trains, and I have a couple of these ones, and they have a really long wheelbase. Like I don't have anything to reference it with, but like they're
Big.
they're longer than this micrometer here. Let's just say that. And the 027 curves, like we said, it's a 27-inch diameter, which is very, very sharp. And these long trains were not able to negotiate those 027 curves. So Lionel created their own size for 027, where they're shrunk down versions of the trains that are able to negotiate those curves. But like somebody asked that question, and it's like, well, that's what it is. If somebody didn't tell you about that, I'm sorry. But yeah, there's people out there that they have questions. I'm trying to remember what. Oh yeah, I know a little question I had is, and this one's a little deeper in the weeds, but like, how do I know I'm not getting ripped off when I sell these trains? Like somebody's buying them off of me on the cheap, and I don't realize the true value of these because there's some trains out there that people don't realize are valuable. I heard a story where someone brought a specific Lionel train to an auction house and said, I'll give you 200, or I'll sell this to you for $250. And the guy opened up the box, took one look at the train, and said, I need you to step in my office, please. And literally sat the guy down and told him, this train set here is very, very rare and could probably go for $10,000 on auction. And he said, I highly recommend do a little bit of research on this specific train. Take it to this auction house here and tell them you want to put this up for auction. The guy came back a couple months later saying, thank you so much. That train sold for more than what I was originally thinking it was worth. You saved me a lot of money. So, but, and that's the thing. It's like, there's trains that are valuable and there's trains that aren't valuable. And you have to remember, the first train you buy, is, even if it's it doesn't matter what manufacturer it is, because there's arguments about manufacturers and the quality of them. But your first model train isn't going to be your last model train. And your first model railroad isn't going to be your last model railroad. It's okay to say goodbye to things. And it's like, there's a phrase I like to use where if it doesn't bring you happiness, you shouldn't be doing it. Yeah. I'm not saying that about model railroading in general, because model railroading can bring you stress a lot. Just because.
Yeah. To jump back in here real quick before we really fully dive into these questions, back to layouts and talking about your first layout doesn't have to be your last. Of the 17 responses we got, 3 folks said they don't even have a layout yet so far. They're just starting out. But of those, 3 people said they only have had one layout. And then people 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layouts. So it's something that it's a process you go through. Sometimes you'll have multiple layouts at once, whether it's, you have a couple of different, like if you're an N scale, you could have 2 or 3 different 2x4 layouts and you can kind of swap them out. Or sometimes it's, well, I moved from one space to another and now I don't have, or maybe now I have more space, so I want to build a larger layout. So the older one is going to get taken apart, salvage some pieces off of it and built into a new one. The key thing is, model railroading is a journey. Your first layout is basically, unless you get super frustrated and leave the hobby, which I hope you don't, because this can be such a fun hobby. But if you do, then sure, your first layout might be your last. But if you stick with the hobby, your first layout will not be your last. No, you will even, I have my first real permanent layout that I'm working on now, and I've gotten to the point where I'm going to take it up. I'm going to rip it apart. I'm going to put it back together almost exactly the same way it was. But that'll basically be a whole new layout because it'll be all new track work. It'll be put out much more thought into how it's put together and things like that. So it's a journey. And don't get discouraged if you build your first layout and you're like, well, I don't really like this part of it, or I'm a little frustrated with that part of it. It's all about the learning process. and you take that with you. You enjoy the layout you have for what it is for a little while, and then if you're really frustrated with it, you take it apart, you put something new together,
Yep,
and you try something else different.
absolutely. And that's one place where I tend to struggle, especially if you, and I'll say this, especially if you happen to be a person that is counting the cost of things. Be
Hmm.
forewarned that the money you put into the bench work and the scenery, and sometimes about, I'd want to say about 50% of the time, the track and the wiring, when it comes to taking down the layout, that stuff can't always be salvageable. There are ways to
Yes.
salvage the track if you do it a very specific way, but most often people will just say, scrap the track, go and buy more, and just use it. Because
Track.
and
Yes.
it's
I was
just
gonna
those
say,
are the
in the
lost
grand
cause.
scheme of things, your track is not that expensive.
No.
Yeah, it hurts a little bit to have to throw away 50, 60, $70 worth of track, maybe even $100 worth of track. But compared to that's the price of like one engine,
Yeah.
one train engine
Right.
worth of track. And if in order to make sure that your one train engine that you're buying with that same amount of money runs well on something that you enjoy, that's a price worth paying.
Right. And also take into account that building just one railroad isn't going to give you all the skills that you need for building model railroads. You're always
Hmm.
going to learn something or want to try something new from something you have learned when it comes to building layout number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Like for me, it's like most the first two layouts that I had were just straight flat on the plywood, no side beams or anything. I've built a table of a hollow core door, and I've built a 2 foot by 4 foot layout as well. And those ones, they had the plywood with the side walls made out of 1x4s and everything. But now I'm switching into a new section where I'm doing the sectional T-track modules, and some of those are in kit form by Osborne or Klondikes or something. Or some of them I'm making myself using some of the techniques I've learned. And while the scenery techniques aren't necessarily changing as much, I'm going to challenge myself to do different styles of scenery and things. I'm going to challenge myself to do an over and under section where the trains go over an elevation because I haven't done that yet. And the fact that it's also going to be on a shelf, so I got to learn how to mount the shelf to the walls in a way that is not tilted or slanting or anything, and going to be even. So I'm doing a couple of new things. So you're always going to learn something new. And if you only stick with one layout to begin with, you're never going to get those experiences to learn how to advance beyond layout number 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
let's go ahead and jump into some of these questions. Or we'll there were 17 people responded, so we're not going to be able to get to every question here, and some of the but we're going to try and focus on some of the ones that I think we're going to answer a couple of questions here that I think apply to a large group of folks getting into the hobby. And the first one, we've already kind of talked about, which is how much space do I really need for even a 4x8 layout? And we kind of touched on that. In my opinion, you need as much space as allows you to reach everywhere. Sam, do you have any other input on that? About how much space you should give yourself around each side,
Um,
anything like that?
well, since we're starting about beginner layouts, just make sure that the space, to brush a little more, make sure that the space you're putting it in is clean and dry
Mm-hmm.
and everything.
Yes.
Make sure that it's not, you don't necessarily want it in a cluttered space, because I've heard that putting a model railroad in a cluttered space discourages wanting to work on it. So make sure your
Yes.
space is cleaned, and also make sure that you're not putting it in a space where it would become difficult to maneuver around. So, like, for example,
Yes.
don't be putting it in your dining room with your dining table so that it's taking up all the space when you're trying to get the in-laws into the dining room for Thanksgiving. So, or don't
Yeah.
put, or if it's in the middle of the living room, how some model railroads can be set up, it might look a little unsightly, or it takes up too much space, or cats like to jump on model railroads and stuff like that. So, just be forewarned about that stuff. In
Yeah.
combination of like how much space do you need? I agree with you. As much space as you need, and there are plenty of books out there that talk about taking a 4x8 sheet of plywood and cutting it up to make different sizes and shapes. I've seen somewhere somebody cut a section out of one of the 8-foot sections that went about halfway down, so they kind of made like a little U shape. And they had like this little pit where they could sit inside and reach everything from inside of there. There's plenty of ways to do it, but just make sure that it's not in a place where it'll get in the way, and make sure you can easily reach it without knocking stuff over by leaning on it or damaging things or whatnot. Just be forewarned about that. I'm not saying I'm not saying put plexiglass on the side of it, which you're more than welcome to, but it's not. You just keep that in mind, that you need to be able to access the whole layout.
Yeah. And this kind of leads into one of the other questions, which is how can I build a layout in a small space? And part of it is, I think what you were saying, you can start with, take your 4x8 sheet of plywood and cut it into a few different pieces. There's a lot of resources. Like Sam was saying, there have been a number of books that have been published on layout design and how to utilize 4x8 sheets of plywood in creative ways to get interesting shapes.
I've got one right here. I've got one book right here from Model Railroaders. HO Railroad from start to finish, a 4x8 layout you can build. This is an excellent one. Now, you have to keep in mind, they're probably going to use some terminology in this book that you might not understand. But it does walk you through the whole process of how to build a 4x8 layout. There's other stuff like for N scale from the Atlas Model Railroad Company, one of the biggest manufacturers of N scale trains. They've got their level 1 book number 6, Introduction to N scale model railroading. So, and even going back, even into the 60s, people were writing books on this. This is Lynn Westcott's HO Primer, Model Railroading for All. And all those books are definitely good examples of books to get just to give you ideas. And those definitely, especially the N scale one from Atlas, that one really shows how to fit a layout into a small space. The only thing is, if you are modeling a railroad to try and recreate something, it's a lot harder. But if you're a beginner, most of the layouts in there are single track or double track loops with a couple of sidings. And they're not exactly prototypical. So, more than likely, it's not going to be that much of a problem for you. Like the gentleman that we're helping that joined our community, we're teaching him how to build just a simple a double track loop to loop, where it looks like it just kind of goes back and forth, but on a different track each time. So,
and just to jump in real quick, you used the word prototypical there.
Oh,
when we in the model, all these terms that we use without thinking. Prototypical, when we say that, we mean relating to and following closely the prototype, which in model railroading, when we talk about the prototype, we mean real railroads. So if we say, I'm modeling a prototypical layout, that means that I am basing it very closely on a real location with a real railroad in a real time. It's tied to a specific place, time, and thing. Whereas you can start to do more what we call freelance, which is either a fictional railroad or a fictional location or something that's not necessarily based on anything in particular. So when we use terms like that, that's kind of what we mean.
Yeah.
Let's go. So we've already answered a couple of these questions. Things like how do you decide what scale to work on? We said earlier, kind of go on that that scale between how much detail do I want, how much space do I have, and kind of find a medium ground for you. And I would say, if you can, find some folks that model in a couple of different scales and get to see what their trains look like in real life. That way you can kind of gauge it for yourself.
Or even
Anything else to add on that, Sam?
Or even go to your hobby shop, because your hobby shop will
Yes.
have not Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby does have model trains, but that's not where I'd recommend. Nor Menards, if you happen to live where Menards is. But go to a model train hobby shop that has model trains on display for purchase. Look at the different sizes that they have. Maybe even just look at the ones that interest you the most. Like, just look through the trains that they have and just say, hey, that one looks interesting. I might like that one. Compare the prices on them, see how much you're able to afford, and then at that point say, okay, I like this train in this scale. I like that train in that scale. These are the prices of them. This is the size I want or I have to work with. This is where I'm going to go. That's really kind of, for someone that doesn't have a knowledge of like what their favorite railroad is or something like that. Just looking at the model trains on display and saying, I like that one, is a great starting point for what it is. Because some scales, they don't have the trains that you might like. There's so many things in N scale that I would love to have, but they're just not made because N scale is so small and has kind of been in the number 2 or 3 spot, depending on if you count Lionel, for decades. So it's not as common. So yeah, if you want to know what scale you want, compare your size, your available size, and then go to your hobby shop and see what trains you like the look of and what trains you can afford, and find a middle ground for that.
Agreed. So I've got two more questions here I want to quickly touch on, and then we can jump into a couple pieces of advice that members of the community have.
Yes.
So one is something that I personally still struggle with to this day. So don't be worried if you struggle with this in the beginning. How do you diagnose problems and take general care of your locomotive and cars, especially as a younger person, but also as an older train enthusiast with little or no experience in the jargon? Personally, I still don't know what the motor coil is and why it would need to be replaced, is the question.
Oh, the dreaded motor coil.
I agree with you there.
The forbidden smoke.
So I guess there's a couple of different pieces of advice I would give. The first is when you buy something like a model railroad locomotive, there's a little piece of paper usually inside that has like an exploded parts diagram, which has everything.
I've kind of got one of those right
every
here.
little thing. It has part numbers for every little piece of that. And if you can open up your train and see, okay, that's the part that's broken, and look at your piece of paper and you say, okay, that's the part, then you can just order that part.
Yep.
For older trains, that gets a bit harder because some of those pieces aren't manufactured anymore and things like that. But that's, for a very, 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 very basic overview, open it up. That's the thing that's broken. That's what I need. If you can't determine that, it gets a little harder. And there's a few different steps that you can follow. You can check if it's an electrical problem. You can check if it is a mechanical problem. And there's a couple different ways of doing that, involving putting it on a piece of track that runs trains well and turning on the power and seeing if it picks up power, going directly to the motors with a couple of alligator clips from the rails and seeing if the motor spins, things like that.
Or using a multimeter.
Or using a multimeter if you're familiar with how to use one of those. Absolutely.
Yep. Or but the simplest way, if you try to run a train and it doesn't work, and it has worked before, I'm not saying call customer support. I'm just saying go to your hobby shop and say, hey, I have this train and it was working, now it's not. Can you look at it? The people
now it's doing that.
The people at the model train stores know what they're talking about, know that they're doing a lot of the hobby shops. They do the repairs on the trains themselves as well as selling them to you. So And they can
Absolutely.
even tell you what's wrong with it if you really want to know. Or you can just tell them, fix it for me. I don't care what it does. Just fix it for me. They'd be more than happy to do that for you for a fee. And so, and that
And
doing that repair work also, of course, helps the brick and mortar shops. So,
yeah, the physical retail locations of a lot of model train shops and stuff have been struggling over the past couple decades because internet, internet sales have taken over, and it's a good and bad thing. It makes things a lot easier for a lot of people to access, but
yeah,
at the same time, there's a loss of the communities and these very skilled people that were running these shops. So pros and cons of things, but yeah,
yep.
going to your model train store, an excellent example, an excellent way to gain general knowledge, but especially if you're having some sort of trouble with your trains.
Yep.
And kind of as an extension of that into the digital age, there are online communities, forums, Reddit pages, Discord servers like ours.
Yeah, I was about to say our Discord server.
Yeah. Places where you can basically say it was doing this, now it's doing that, and share some pictures, maybe a video.
Yep.
And there are tons of people online that are going to be super helpful in trying to help you diagnose your problem. So,
Absolutely.
And even something as simple as opening up YouTube and typing in roughly what you're seeing and seeing what comes up. There's a lot of really helpful videos on YouTube as well. So,
Oh yeah, one in particular I recommend is DIY and Digital. He's a great end scaler, and he talks about a lot, and he actually does a monthly Q&A. So if you have a question, you can find his Q&A videos, go in there, ask questions, and he will answer them. He reads his comments and answers them. So yeah, that's one place I'd highly recommend go to. DIY and Digital on YouTube. Jimmy's a great guy.
That he is.
So.
Anything else before we move on from that?
Nope.
All right, cool. The last question, it's two people kind of asked this. I'm a little hesitant to talk about this just because we're starting to get a little bit further into, now I'm starting to really get into this model train stuff. But the questions are basically, the one question is, how do I paint stuff and make it look good? And the other one is, I'd like to be able to paint and customize my own rolling stock when I was younger, and I still would like to try that sometime in the future. How do I do that? So as someone who, I have my own fictional railroad, I've painted and detailed a bunch of stuff for my fictional railroad. It's kind of just a learning experience. You start off with, in my experience, I started off with, regular paintbrushes, painting trains. And then eventually over time, I learned about airbrushes and I started getting into that. You can also go in a route of rattle cans. But
or if you know how
it's kind of just a learning journey.
Yeah. Or if you know how to make model planes, model cars, model boats, or if you do, if you happen to know what this term is, if you have worked with Gundams, or if you do like tabletop Warhammer games, or something like that, something that involves like model building or stuff. In those cases, you already have all the tips and techniques you need in order to do something like that. But again, yeah, that one's going way into the weeds of, that's like more like steps 5 and 6 or something like that.
So my basic advice would be trial and error. Look up some tutorials online. There's some really great tutorials online, and start with stuff that you're not afraid to mess up on. Start with your cheaper stuff that you're not going to be super upset with yourself if you screw it up. And we won't go much deeper into that than that. So
just a quick mention and that's it.
Yeah.
So so we did also ask one final question of our people, and I know we're this episode's going longer than normal, but I'm not upset about that. I'm like, it's not even a thing of we're going to make this 2 episodes or something. I feel like this is enough of a topic that I don't want to split it up and have these introductory people wait 2 weeks before we come out, unless they're joining us later on, which wouldn't be a problem, but I don't want to do that. I want to make sure we're covering everything right here, right now.
Yeah. I think this is important enough that it's worth going over time.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So anyway, so we asked the question because as we saw, over 85% of our community has been in this hobby 10 years or longer. And a lot of them have learned things over the years. And we got a lot of really good answers of people like, if you were to talk to someone who is just getting into the hobby, maybe don't have any information about this at all, what are these pieces of information? And we're going to post the majority of these on a Google Doc sheet that's going to be open to the public and able for you to view. We'll put the link down in the description so you can go look at these questions or at these comments and see what they're referring to. And if you're hesitant about model railroading, take a look at these. These are going to encourage you, I guarantee it. Not to sound too much like an influencer, but yeah. So we're gonna read off, or you are going to read off about two or three of them that we found that we thought were really, really good pieces of advice. So, and so, these are all anonymous.
Yeah, the first couple here I'm going to combine because they all kind of point to the same thing.
Right.
The first here is do plenty of research on both real and model trains.
Yep.
Like we were talking about earlier in the episode, go to your train store. Go to different, train events if you really want to get into the hobby. See what everything looks like. See what paint schemes, what paint colors on the trains catch your eye, what you want to go into. And then maybe look into that railroad if you get really interested in one specific railroad and do some research on that. See what interests you.
Go to the library and then go to the library. Ask, where's your section on railroad books? Because especially the larger libraries, sometimes they'll have books about the local railroads that served your town or city, or they have a collection of general knowledge, and some of them even have model railroad books as well that you can rent out and read and study and give you that advice that you need. And of course, the internet. Ta-da!
Yes. So the next thing that I want to tie kind of into that is be patient. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to learn in this hobby. Be willing to learn. Yes. Be willing to learn, because the more you know about the hobby, the more opportunities you'll find to engage in the hobby. But be patient, but being patient and being willing to learn are only part of the equation. Don't be a jerk. There are a lot of people with different skills in this hobby, and many of them are willing to share what they know with others, especially those who are new. Don't be a know-it-all and keep an open mind. The hobby is so much more enjoyable when you engage in it with others, but if you're unpleasant to be around, you'll miss out on a lot of opportunities. As you learn things, don't feel like you know everything, because there's so many different perspectives and so many different people out there, and you don't want to alienate all those other folks, because as a community of model railroaders that we are, and model train people, we, I think, are pretty qualified to say this hobby is so much more fun when shared with others.
Oh yeah. And to add on to that is, like, be careful of, like, for me personally, I have a problem of, I tend to stick to the first thing I'm told as the truth and don't move on from it. I'm getting better at that. But, like, if, like, we had the gentleman that joined our Discord server, he was asking about track elevation, because how he's designing his, it's kind of going to go up and down a hill. And somebody told him, don't make a hill that has a gradient of more than 2%. And then I came along and I was helping him design the layout, and I designed one that had a gradient of about 3 to 3.5%. And he was like, wait a minute, so-and-so told me I shouldn't go over 2%. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go again. It's like,
listen, no,
yeah,
there's a lot of these things where we have these general rules, but and they're good rules, good general rules. They help, and they're good things to abide by, but they're not hard rules. You can kind of play loose with some of them.
Yes, exactly. And it's like there are arguments. Like there was even back in the day, I think it was like in the 1980s, there was an N scale company that made locomotives, and they specifically advertised them of these trains can go up a 35% grade. That's how they advertised them. They advertised them as these can go up steep hills without a problem and pull your trains up any hill you want, which that was great at the time. Not so much today because those engines are kind of a little junk now. Not that they're bad, just they're the cheaper brands now, or the second hand or third hand or 20th hand. So yeah, but it's like don't go off of just the very first thing that somebody tells you, and then when somebody tells you something different, go, well, so and so said this. It's like,
to expound.
Go ahead. No, you.
I was gonna basically just take your response to this and read it verbatim.
Yeah, go ahead, read it.
Take everything you hear about the hobby with a grain of salt. Everyone has their own opinions, some right and some wrong. Some people think, maybe unconsciously, that their advice is the only way and forget that they're talking to someone new in the hobby. So make sure you always follow rule number 1 of model railroading: your layout, your rules.
Yes.
If you try to please everyone, you just won't be happy.
Absolutely. It's like it's like it's supposed to be your hobby. When you pick a hobby, you're doing it for yourself because it brings joy to you. That's why it's your hobby. If you're trying to do something to please other people, unless it's for a contest, don't try to take everyone's advice and cram it in, because if you do that, then it's no longer your hobby. You're just trying to do something to please people, and it's not going to please you. So even what we're talking here, we're trying our best to provide you with just the basic get-to-know information that can kind of give you your first foot in the door and get you to get that one foot in front of the other in the hobby. But even a couple of the things that we've said on here can be taken with a grain of salt because, you know, like I said, we've had to ground ourselves in this discussion just to make sure that we're not going too deep in the weeds, even though we have. But I hope at the very least that those conversations too were of interest to you, just to show we are passionate about this hobby, and there's a lot of interesting things and a lot of interesting rabbit holes.
Yeah. So, I do want to, I'm trying to be conscious of the time, so I'm going to wrap up on this one kind of succinct one, which I think is really important. And then, like Sam said, we'll share a lot of these other ones out, so there'll be plenty of time for you to read them on your own and kind of digest them. But I want to wrap up on this one here because I think it's super important to talk about, which is don't stress about perfection. Just take the plunge and do it. Yeah. And at the end, they have a statement here: don't worry about rivet counting, which is something we say in the community where someone gets so into the weeds that they're counting every single little rivet on the model train. And for some people, that's super enjoyable, but don't worry so much about that, especially when you're getting into the hobby. Just take the plunge and do it. Try it out. Enjoy yourself.
Right. Don't be worried about like how your scenery is going to come out or how a train's going to look or something. My pastor gave a really interesting analogy because he did a sermon on anxiety today, and he said in a study, like 91% of the things that people worry about don't even happen, and the other 9%, people either got through them in an easier way than they were expecting, or they got through something and realized, hey, that was all like it was like this eye-opening moment of wow, this is actually more interesting than I thought it was going to be. They didn't even have anything to worry about in the first place. And it's like, you are a beginner in this. You're not going to have a giant, beautiful layout that fills a barn like, say, Northlands in up there in Pennsylvania, or the San Diego Model Railroad Museum, or the Great Railroad Story in Chicago. Your like my first attempt at scenery, I was just trying to recreate a pair of paintings in one little scene. And I impressed myself with how good I did the scenery, and I've never done scenery before. Like, I've watched plenty of videos on it, I've watched plenty of people do it before, so I just kind of took their techniques and like, okay, I need to do this, this, and this. And I did have to go back and do some modifications to that scenery, but at the very end, I was impressed with myself at how well I did on that. So don't be afraid to make mistakes, because mistakes are how you learn.
100%.
Yeah. And like
that's literally almost verbatim. That's one of the other responses on here is don't be afraid to try things and fail. It's how we learn.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's yeah, don't be too gung-ho about the details. It's like, and if you're just trying to operate trains to have fun, don't be worried about if someone says, oh, well, that railroad didn't operate with those cars. Those cars are from the 1940s and the engine's from 1992. And it's like, don't listen to someone like that in that sense if you're just trying to operate a train just to have fun with a train. Because that's going to happen a lot. Trust me.
And you know, this again applies more broadly even than that. You know, it applies to, like Sam was saying, your first attempts at doing little scenery things, or your first attempts at putting down train tracks, or your first attempt at any of these things. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about perfection. It's not going to happen at first. You're not going to get it right on the first try. And if you do, that's awesome. Great for you. I'm really excited to hear about that, because it does happen. Yep. But don't expect for it to happen. Just don't let analysis paralysis get the better of you. You got to try some things sometimes. You got to break a couple eggs to make an omelet, you know? So make sure you're having fun and, you know, getting out there and trying new things.
Yep. And then the last one is like, and I believe we've just kept repeating this one over and over and over and over again throughout this whole hour and 40 minutes that we've been going on now. But go to your hobby shops and go to your railroad museums or model railroad clubs or museums or whatever, and talk to the people there and ask them, because guaranteed they know other people that are also in the hobby, and there are people out there that are willing to help you on an introductory level and work with you step by step, be a mentor, so to speak. Like in our model railroad community, we have the ability for sponsors. We can say, there can be a member that says, I'm willing to sponsor this person for a year in the hobby, or this person is under 16 years of age, but I want to get them involved in the hobby. I'm willing to vouch as their sponsor to help them be involved in the hobby through our club. And those people are just like us. Like, they've got 10, 20 or more years of experience in this hobby. So more than likely, you're going to get all the information you need and all the help that you can from those groups. But again, like I have said before, take everything with a grain of salt, just because you will come across those people that don't. Unfortunately, it's how it is. Just like the internet. Take the internet with about a can of salt. But so don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to get out there and learn things. Don't be afraid to try things. And most importantly,
welcome to what myself and many other people consider to be one of the greatest hobbies in the world.
The world's greatest hobby. Yeah.
It's a great place to be.
Yeah. And also, one other thing that I would recommend, and this one's just because if you really are interested in this, I recommend a couple. You can go, I believe it's, I don't want to get it wrong, but I probably am. You can get, I recommend subscriptions to a couple of magazines. One, I'd go with Firecrown Media with their Trains magazine, which talks about all the prototype railroads, news in railroad industry, and can be a real boon of inspiration of what railroads you'd want to model. And then their sister magazine, Model Railroader. They also have another one called Classic Trains, which deals more with the Lionel and the American Flyer. But Model Railroader focuses a lot on the more scale stuff. Every year they try to have a project layout that with step-by-steps, and they always try to make it a little different every year. So there's always something new to learn there. Plenty of tips and tutorials. It's not just showing off people's layouts, as much as that's where a lot of us get it from. And then there's another pair, which is Railroad Model Craftsman and Railfan and Railroad. Those two magazines are, it's the competitor to Trains and Model Railroader, but they are another good example of it. So I recommend those groups. And then there's a couple others out there, people who write books. Firecrown, formerly Kalmbosch, has a whole library of modern and past model railroad books that talk about every scene, every aspect of the hobby that you could think of. And you'll see a lot of these sitting in a book rack at your hobby shop. But I highly recommend,
or even your local bookstore.
Yeah.
Go to the magazine rack
Barnes
and find one of these magazines and take a flip through.
Barnes and Noble has them. Back when, I don't think Kroger still has it, or not Kroger. I've seen it in Kroger in their magazine section. I saw it in Meijer. I've seen it in I'm pretty sure I've seen it in Walmart, but Barnes and Noble definitely. Go to the magazine racks. Occasionally, if the person that's managing that store happens to have that aficionation for it, you might see these magazines sitting on the shelves. Definitely at Barnes and Noble, just because it's such a wide publication. But so look for all those and use them as inspiration to, and also maybe even an encouragement. Say, I want to get to that level of building Frank Ellison's Delta lines. Say you want to reach that. Well, you got to start with your little beginner 4x8 layout right here before you can do a big layout like that, because you're never going to get to that level if you don't start small. If you start too big, you're going to get burned out. Yeah. And you're not going to lose the interest if you don't take the proper steps and stay within your levels of knowledge and understanding and skill and work on them. Think of it almost like a video game where you have to go through and you have to build up your XP and apply it to different skills. And as you apply those skills, you are able to do things better in the game and advance quicker as you go through. Yeah. But this isn't a race, and it's not even a marathon. It's just a casual stroll in the park.
Exactly. So hopefully this has been helpful to you folks that are just starting out in our hobby. If you have any questions about anything we talked about, if you're listening on YouTube, put it down in the comments below, and we'll try our best to answer them. Like we said, a lot of those other pieces of advice are going to wind up in the description. So check those out. And thanks so much for listening, and hope you have fun getting into this hobby.
Yes, welcome. And again, check Reddit. Reddit's a great one. That's how I found out about this community, or join our community or others like it, because there are plenty of them. And don't be afraid to ask. It the famous question, or the famous saying goes, the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. There are no stupid questions. Period.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid.
Welcome to the hobby.
Yes. Welcome to the hobby.
And,
we hope you enjoy your time here, and we hope it stays with you for a while and you're able to pass it on to the next generation, because unlike other people say, this hobby is growing. We are
Absolutely.
proof of that. So thank you so much for listening and or watching. Be sure to check our links down below and check us out in other places. Share us around. If you know somebody that's in this situation, share it with them. And we hope that this has been an eye-opener, and if not, just complain in the comments and I'll take the fall for it. Thank you so much, and take care, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye, guys.